today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream. This is our Transformation Ground Control live podcast recording of our interview for this week's podcast. Today's topic is enterprise architecture in software selection and implementation. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And I will introduce our guest in just a moment. I'm excited to have our first-time guest with us here today on the podcast and in the live discussion here today. But before I introduce our guest, a couple logistical things. As I mentioned, our topic today is enterprise architecture and software selection and implementation. I've got a list of questions I'm going to start with here with our guest to cover this topic, but I'd love to hear from you, the audience. What kind of topics or questions do you have in mind as it relates to enterprise architecture and in software selection and implementation? We'll get to those questions here in just a moment. But in the meantime, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from today. We tend to try and reach as much of the global digital transformation and ERP community as we can. So I'd love to hear what city and country you're joining from today. And then second of all, as I mentioned before, this is a live recording of an interview that will become part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast that gets released a week from tomorrow. So every Wednesday, new episodes of the show are released, and this podcast recording will become part of that podcast episode. We'll add some more content to it and edit it and polish it and all that good stuff. It'll get released a week from tomorrow. You can find that podcast on Transformation Ground Control is what it's called. You can find that podcast on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And it also is on audio podcast platforms throughout the world as well. So be sure to check out the podcast there. So again, drop in the chat if you don't mind what city and country you're joining from. And in the meantime, we'll get to our topic at hand here. And that topic, again, is enterprise architecture in software selection and implementation. And with me, joining me from Technology Evaluation Centers is Mehdi. I'm going to try to pronounce your last name, Mehdi, and you can correct me here. Aftahi? Is that how you say your last name?
That's
Aftahi?
perfect. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, Mehdi, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you here today. We've known each other for quite some time in the industry. We've been in the same circles for quite some time, but this is our first time together on this podcast. So thank you for being here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into the topic at hand here. Tell us about yourself, and if you don't mind, tell us about Technology Evaluation Centers as well.
Sure. I'll talk about Technology Evaluation Centers first and my role in it. Technology Evaluation Center is a software selection consulting advisory firm. We are focusing on helping our client in evaluation and selection of applications for their enterprise, ERPs and CRMs and applications such as that. One thing about our services is that we are totally impartial, agnostic, and we care about the selecting the right software, and we don't take any commissions or take any sides from the vendors. We have a software platform that allows us to evaluate and compare different applications. Is available online, and many partners and vendors and end users are actually able to use that to define their requirements online and then get the information from the vendors and to be able to see which one fits their requirements the best. So that's about Technology Evaluation Centers, and my role as a CTO. I also, on top of the technologies that I'm in charge of, I also manage the consulting practice that we have, which is including the selections and the enterprise architecture projects and managing partners and so on.
Great. Yeah, and it's we have an interesting relationship, our two companies, because on paper we should be mortal enemies, should we not? I mean, we're competitors. We should be going at each other's throats, but we found a way to collaborate in this industry instead.
Yeah, that's a very interesting analogy, but we are not enemies for sure. We believe in. I think you believe in the same thing. There is enough business out there for all of us. First, then we have something I think that we can make make it public and expose it to more consultants such as yourselves, so you can benefit from it. And I don't think that you're taking away any business from us by using our technology. And the contrary, I think that by promoting good knowledge and good information out there, we're going to have more successful projects and more business for you, more business for us. And that's our motivation behind our partnership, right? So that's what we set out to do. It's like we're getting into 4th or 5th year of our relationship. I
think
believe.
so. It was right after we started third stage. That was one of the first. I think it was the first partnership we forged was with you guys with TEC.
Yeah.
So yeah, we license your technology. We use it as part of our consulting offering. Obviously, it's your technology, and you have your own clients. We have our clients. Sometimes we compete. We still compete sometimes, but it's more often than not that we're complementing each other.
For sure.
Well, good to have you here. This should be a good perspective, being that we both do similar sorts of things and see similar sorts of decision processes. And this topic in particular, before we jump into it here, this topic in particular is something that you're going to be presenting at our upcoming Stratosphere conference. And I'm going to pop up a little text here that tells you a little bit more about it. But you and I, so TEC in third stage, as well as 2 other sponsors, Taft Law and Avero Advisors. There's 4 of us that are co-sponsoring this event in October in Denver, Colorado. It's a conference, it's a 3-day conference with Mehdi, myself, and about a dozen other speakers that'll be there, both from our companies as well as other companies as well. You can learn more about that event by going to stratosphere2023.com. But you're going to be at that event speaking about this topic here today, although maybe in a little bit more of a formal presentation style, whereas today we're going to have more of an informal conversation. So this will be a similar topic as to what you'll cover at Stratosphere in October. Is that right?
Yes, I'm very excited to be there and to meet again with your team and to exchange some information with participants in this very. The last time we went to the Stratosphere, it was right before COVID struck in San Diego. I think that was my last trip before COVID. But since then, we have done a lot together, but not in person and not in these kinds of events. So I'm very excited to be there, and for sure it's going to be hopefully a very good, informative session for everybody. Right. And I will be talking about this topic, and as you mentioned, it's going to be a little bit more formal presentation, and I'm probably going to be spending time there to answer any specific questions from anybody there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a special discount code for our listeners here today. If I'm going to pop it here on the screen, but it's STRAT20, STRAT20. That's a promotional code you can use to get a 20% discount on the conference passes. So if you go to stratosphere2023.com, you can see the whole agenda. You can see what Mehdi's going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about, what other speakers are going to talk about. You can see all the live entertainment and peer networking opportunities, great educational and networking opportunities. So I encourage you to join. And if you use this code I have in front of you, STRAT20, you can get a 20% discount on the pass. So that's the code you would use when you go to checkout or when you go to purchase your pass. You can get that discount. We also have a VIP level pass too that gives you more access to people like Mehdi and myself, and in smaller groups and some smaller breakout sessions that are just for VIP pass holders. So be sure to check that out as well. Again, go to stratosphere2023.com, promo code STRAT20 to get 20% off. So I'll pop that up again later throughout the conversation here today as we go, just as a reminder. But in the meantime, I want to sort of jump to the audience here and thank everyone who chimed in on where they're joining from today. You can see if we look at the various streams here, we've got people from all over the world, ranging from Denver, Colorado to London, Minneapolis, Minnesota, The Hague, Stone Lake, Wisconsin, Windham, North Carolina, Montana, Clovis, California, Netherlands, New York City, Raleigh, North Carolina, East Germany. So a lot of people from all over the world. So thank you for being here today from wherever you're joining from here today. And I don't know if you mentioned this, Mehdi, but you are in Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, we are in Montreal, Canada, and our office is virtual office. I guess is at our homes, but our headquarters in South Shore of Montreal. And although we are from Canada, we work globally. We work throughout the world. We have projects in Far East, Europe, South America, and of course the United States and Canada. So it's good to have the audience from all over the world, and it's a topic that is not just for North America. This specific topic, and in general, software selection is very challenging for everybody, and it's good to have everybody chiming in and listening in. So hopefully we can have some benefits to the audience through these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start there with then the topic today is obviously enterprise architecture and how it
Yeah.
fits into a software selection and implementation process. But if you sort of back up and just start with the real basics here, what exactly is enterprise architecture?
Enterprise architecture refers to the IT or information technology structure that you have in place that at any time has to be able to cover your business requirements and business needs. So when you are talking about any business, you have a series of business processes that are handled through various means, right? Could be in the old days, it would be manual forms or Excel or anything else. Nowadays, we try to put everything in digital format and make them connect and flow through the systems. So these systems that we are talking about, it could be disparate systems, or it could be disjointed systems, or it could be anything that the company evolved with. At any given time, you have an architecture that serves the company in providing those business processes. So, by defining the architecture, what we mean is to draw the blueprint of what that system is today, and hopefully you can, you know, improve it, find the gaps, find the holes where the business processes do not connect, they don't talk to each other, and where there are still manual or Excel processes involved. So that is the basic promise of, or the definition of an enterprise architecture. It's like the blueprint of a building, or something that you're trying to build. This is the blueprint of your information technology within any organization. They must have it. And it's very interesting that in many organizations that we go for, there is no such a thing. Like, they don't know all the different moving parts, or they don't know all the systems that are actually involved in their business processes. It's a very good exercise to start with, to just understand what you're dealing with before even going to about improving or replacing or ripping and replacing some of those systems. You have to know where you start from. And enterprise architecture, as a definition, is what is the information technology systems or platforms that you're currently using, and what they do, how they talk to each other, what business processes they cover, and in general, where the parameters of those, or not parameters, like the scope of those applications or platforms are.
Right, right. Yeah, and I'd love to hear from the audience, what your thoughts are on enterprise architecture. Is it something you're familiar with? Have you addressed EA or enterprise architecture in the past? I'd love to hear from the audience, just any comments or thoughts you have around just the general concept of enterprise architecture. Here's a question from Kyler that I think is a good one. Kyler on LinkedIn, who says, what comes first, selection, the software selection, or system architecture? So I guess it maybe begs a broader question of where and how does enterprise architecture fit into the entire life cycle of software selection, evaluation, and implementation?
Exactly. So It's very interesting because when you're talking about a problem within the organization, that's where it's a trigger for change, right?
Hmm.
There is a problem, there is a business need, there is a business process that is not working properly, or you don't have the right systems. So companies tend to just jump into the technology. So okay, let's go buy this software. So, and that's where the if you're just going about buying the software, you're just going to buy the software, you're going to try to fit it in within your current architecture or current systems. There's going to be a chaos, there's going to be problems going forward. So in our opinion, enterprise architecture is the first step of any software selection process. So you have to, as I said before, you have to know where the problems are, where the systems are, which systems are working, which systems are not working properly, and know where your you know the scope is before jumping into a selection project or an evaluation project. For me, the if you're trying to, for example, renovate your kitchen or your house, you have to do some research in terms of where you're going to move the walls or things like that. So but you need to know where they are, where things are, where the roof is or connected, or where there's bearing walls or things like that. So you do that. But when you're doing the architecture for your enterprise, you need to do the same thing. You cannot just rip apart systems because they're going to have issues later on, or you have to know which systems are going to be replaced at which point, and which systems are going to be integrated into the new system that you're buying or implementing.
Yeah, it seems like I'm curious to hear your feedback on this, Mehdi, or if you see the same phenomena with your clients. But with our client base, a lot of times we find that there's a mentality of we're not going to worry about architecture yet because we're going to get rid of our current architecture, so the current state doesn't matter, and we're going to focus on the future state, but we don't know what the software is yet, so we're not going to worry about enterprise architecture until we've selected the software. And
Yeah.
then, by the way, the software vendor, especially if they're selling us a single ERP system, they're probably going to handle that for us. So we're not going to worry too much about enterprise architecture right now. Is that something you see in the market? And if so, how do you what's
Yeah.
your message to that
So
mindset?
yeah, that's a very good topic. Like, we are not focusing on the current system, so we need to know where the current systems are in order for us to determine where the gaps are, where the problem areas are, where the bottlenecks are. And then the most important part of the enterprise architecture review is the redesign and re-architecture of the new system. So we are doing this. It's just, as I said in the past, for the renovation, you're coming up with a blueprint of the new design. That is where the important stuff is. So
Mm,
it's not about you know documenting what you have. That's obviously the starting point, but then you have to make that change. Say, okay, this is our current state and this is our future state. So you need to have that architecture, uh, future architecture in sight, and say, okay, this is where our ideal solution or architecture is going to be. And then for that architecture, just try to fit the vendors that, or projects, define projects that gives you that future architecture. And I think you just put a you just touched on a very specific topic, that vendors can do it as well. Of course, vendors will eventually have to design the architecture around their own software. But that's where the problem might lie, because they're going to put their software in the middle and they try to put pieces around it to fit their software, and
mm,
not necessarily uh, put your business processes and business requirements first and then try to fit the software to it. That's the difference of making or doing the architecture review and design first, and then selection. And of course, there is a huge um, you know cost savings if you do it ahead of time. Typically, when you do this kind of work with vendors, their consultants, and depending on their experience and which vendor you're going to go for, it's going to be multiple, in the order of, um, multiple orders in terms of covering that cost of the consulting with consultants such as yourselves or our company and advisory firms. So the cost of implementors, which they're going to charge you to do this work, is going to be much higher than you doing it. And of course, they're going to not do this the right way for agnostic view of doing the architecture for you.
Right. Right.
They're
And here,
centering their software in the middle, and everything has to fit their software, as opposed to making sure that your business processes are uh, the important thing in there.
right. Here's a interesting comment that I think triggers another question in my mind here. This is from Nicholas on LinkedIn, and Nicholas says this is a challenge if your ERP is SAP or Infor. And I don't know that I don't necessarily want to pick on specific vendors, but if you look at SAP, Infor, Oracle is the same way, even Microsoft. A lot of these big software vendors have built their ERP systems by acquiring other systems and kind of piecing together almost a best of breed model, but they just happen to be the same software vendor, so they call it fully integrated ERP. But the point is even when you buy what you think is a integrated ERP system from a big software vendor, you still really are getting multiple modules, in some cases multiple systems that need to be tied together. So, what would you say to that as far as how enterprise architecture any more or less important if you're looking at a single ERP vendor or
No,
best of breed model, or is it? What are
no.
your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, that's also a very interesting question. Our goal typically in when we are doing the enterprise architecture design for a company is to reduce the total number of systems they have. So ideally, we want to end up with one system.
Hmm.
This is our goal, and that's what we are aiming for. But by doing the enterprise architecture properly, we see the different parameters that are in play in getting that single system in place, which is the cost of implementation, the cost of buying and acquiring all of those modules, as you mentioned, and also how difficult it is to put everything under single system. Now, in many cases, it is possible. In some cases, it might be more logical and more economical to have a core ERP coupled with niche applications or niche functionality that are bolt on or added to the core system. Uh, the examples that you mentioned, like SAP or Infor, we had projects where, getting SAP or, other applications covered the entire scope of the business processes could cost double or triple the cost of limiting the functionality and adding a bolt-on to it. So that is the promise of what some of the benefits of the enterprise architecture, and knowing what you're getting yourself into before getting into the negotiations with the vendors.
Yeah, and knowing exactly what you're getting and what systems you're replacing, and even if you start to look at like the interim systems, because you even if you have a single ERP system or a core suite of products that are going to replace a multitude of other systems, you're not going to replace those systems overnight. You're not going to just shut them off and then
Exactly.
switch over. You're going to have these interim EA strategies as well. How do you handle that in the interim typically, or is that something you see where
Yeah,
this is going to
exactly.
go away? But
So one of the benefits of doing the enterprise architecture the way we are proposing it to do is that we're going to probably, not probably, we are going to provide a roadmap for the implementation and getting you from where you are to where the ideal to be state of your architecture is. And that how to go from step one to the final stage, which is the roadmap, you can define multiple projects in there. So it could be same ERP in different phases of implementation, where you're going to rip and replace partially some of the systems that you have in place and replace it with the ERP, or having multiple applications working together to get you to your future state. So that roadmap is one of the outcomes of doing a proper enterprise architecture design, which defines the scope of the projects and which projects you're going to be tackling first, and the timing, the phasing of each of these projects, and that roadmap, and eventually your, what we call it, the IT or architect, the enterprise master plan, is the ideal situation where you're going to go for. And by doing the enterprise architecture, you get the commitment from all the stakeholders within your organization to agree on the future state of your platforms. And the road to it is going to be basically defined by the roadmap that you're doing.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and something that you as an organization, not the software vendor, but you as an organization have to decide those things, because it's easy for a software vendor, or even you or I, Mehdi, it's easy for us to turn to a CIO and say, yeah, just shut off all those old systems and turn on the new one and call it good. I mean, that's a high risk sort of scenario that you have to decide as an organization what the right, is it an incremental rollout, or is it a more aggressive schedule? But regardless, you're typically going to have these interim steps where you've got the interim systems that are eventually going to go away, but they're not going away overnight. So you end up integrating them maybe for a short period until you ultimately phase those systems out. So I think that's part of what
makes it for sure. If I go back to the renovation analogy, you are actually cooking in the kitchen while you're renovating it, and most businesses are functioning like that. So you cannot just rip apart the systems and replace it, because then everything else will break down. So during this architecture review, we are going to find where those critical areas are, where the critical systems are, and we have to come up with a methodology in terms of doing the renovation but not breaking the house down, right? So that's where some of the implementation failures that we see come from, because there's not enough research and thought process in the effects of the implementation and how things are going to be about going.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question from Ryan on LinkedIn. Ryan asks, how do emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, or Internet of Things influence the enterprise architecture approach to software selection and implementation? So in other words, these emerging technologies, whether it's AI, blockchain, IoT, or anything else, how does that all tie into this whole enterprise architecture roadmap that you're talking about?
Yeah, in terms of I don't think it necessarily affects the architecture. You still need to see where those technologies fit in your organization, right? So the fact that you have IoT or AI or anything else, just because there is a good name for it, doesn't mean that you can just implement it almost everywhere in your organization. You still have to find where those technologies fit and which processes can benefit from those technologies, and where you draw the line in terms of enabling those technologies to come in. And luckily, most software vendors are putting those technologies, embed those technologies within their applications. So when you're going through the software selection, which is the next stage after the enterprise architecture, and if your requirements for those technologies are well documented, then you can evaluate the best applications that can provide you with the AI or the IoT or any other technologies, emerging technologies that fit your requirements, fit your needs. Getting an AI where you have no used for it is, in that process is just wasting your time and effort in terms of buying the technology and implementing it. And the way I look at it, buying these kinds of technologies is no difference than any other technologies that have evolved in the last 5 or 10 years. You have to have the need for it. And how do you know if you have the need? It's through the enterprise architecture and a true evaluation and selection. And not being mesmerized by the demos and shiny presentations that software vendors often sell their software with. So you have to really know how or when I'm going to use that technology and how it actually benefits my business. How it would improve the product quality, the performance of my employees, or saves me time or saves me money or things like that. You have to identify those ahead of time and then go for it. Of course, technology is something that everybody is excited about, and we want to have as many new technologies in our system, but it has to fit in and has to, in a concerted effort, help us achieve the organization's vision.
Right, right. Absolutely. And just as a reminder, too, as we get to some more audience questions here, this topic is something we're going to dive into in more detail at our Digital Stratosphere event that Mehdi's company and my company are both co-sponsoring. It's called Digital Stratosphere. It's a technology agnostic conference that we're hosting October 4th through the 6th in Denver. You can learn more about it by going to stratosphere2023.com. We have the agenda. Although we keep adding to the agenda, we keep adding speakers and more content, but you can see how the agenda is unfolding right now at stratosphere2023.com. You can also register there. When you do register, though, go use this promo code called STRAT20, STRAT20, and you'll get 20% off the conference pass. Again, that's STRAT20. So be sure to join us there. We'd love to meet you in person, and it'll be a fun in-person event. It's our first in-person event since COVID, so we're actually really excited to co-host that with you, Mehdi.
Thank you.
So some other another question here I have, and this is one that I have for you, Mehdi, is what are some of the business benefits? We've talked about tactically and strategically, how EA fits into a software selection or how it should. And the renovation analogy makes a lot of sense. And as far as, when you're building a house, it's similar to building a technology rollout. But what are some of the general, longer term and shorter term business benefits of enterprise architecture?
Yeah, the benefits are, there is a lot of benefits for this exercise, and often when we go through this exercise with the organizations, they see it. They see right away where the solutions are going to be, and one of the most, I would say, important benefits is the alignment of information technology with business. So you basically trying to at any given time, companies evolve, and the information technology has its own life, goes in one direction. The business might change direction, going here and there, but it's not necessarily the IT that can follow very quickly the business direction. So you need to, at any set intervals, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, you need to have a reset and then align your IT infrastructure with your business vision and business goals. The other benefit I could call the standardization of business processes and IT processes or IT applications. So we see in larger organizations that different departments at given times, they go and buy different pieces of technology, and they start evolving their own business processes within their own departments. And as the companies grow, this is a bigger problem. And one of the benefits of the doing the enterprise architecture is to figure out where these processes that are duplicated or different systems that are doing duplications are, and try to standardize all of those. And of course, it comes with tremendous cost reduction, because you are now standardizing your systems, your business processes, and uh, by doing so, you also allowing the IT to be more agile and follow your business processes and within your organization. And of course, there is always the risk and management of that risk, that you can see where the critical processes are, where there is no systems and there is no data to support it. And that's where some of the companies that we help with, really having that kind of problem, where most of their critical business processes are handled through Excel or other forms, or disconnected from their main ERP system, because those critical systems evolved after the fact that the ERP was in place or the systems were designed. So these are some of the benefits. Of course, there are multiple things that we can talk about. Change management is one of them as well. So you can at third stage, you guys are involved in a lot of implementation, and you see that the having the buy-in and alignment of all the different players or stakeholders within the organization and agree on the system to go forward is a first step of the change management, right? So this process is starting that change management process within the organization as well. So it creates that blueprint of the future architecture of the system, where everybody agrees on, and hopefully they're going to have less problem later on accepting the new system.
Right. Yeah. Those are great benefits, and good points too, in terms of how it can affect or improve your business, shorter term and longer term. We touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth maybe digging into it a little bit more here. And this is a question from Kyler on LinkedIn. But her question is, how does system architecture pivot when organizations choose a best of breed approach versus a core or a single ERP system? So in other words, I know we talked about that EA is important. We've already established that in this conversation, that it's important in both cases. But how do you approach EA any differently in a sort of best of breed environment, which would be multiple systems that you're deploying versus deploying a single ERP system?
Yeah, when we are looking at the EA and the process of enterprise architecture review, we are looking at business processes first, right? So we don't look at the systems. We look at the business processes. We say, okay, what are the needs are, where the business processes are, and then we're trying to basically cover those business processes with IT platforms where they're going to enable those business processes. Now, of course, we have different camps within our client base, where they say, okay, you know what, we have a good purchasing system. We're not going to touch that purchasing system. So that purchasing system is going to stay alone. And then we're going to put the entire ERP system around it. And they're going to buy a new ERP. So the approach is, as I said before, sometimes it makes sense to have something outside of the ERP, because there are cost benefits, there are going to be risk issues in implementation, easiness, or the ease of implementation, if I can call it. But in some cases, it doesn't make sense to have that purchasing system outside of your ERP system, because we can prove it that the ERP system that you're going to get is going to cover the functionality you need, for example, for that purchasing that you have. So it's not one or the other. The enterprise architecture allows you to understand which systems are going to be inside of your overall one system ERP, or which system do not belong there, or it doesn't make sense economically or technically to be included. So it's not a one solution that we always come up with best of breed, or we're going to go with one solution all the time. Every case is different, every client is different, and our goal, as I said before, is to reduce the number of systems that you have. If it means that you're going to have one single solution, and that one single solution is fully capable of providing you with the architect, with the entire business process scope that you have, so let's go for it. If it doesn't make sense and you have to have a best of breed kind of solution, that is also the possibility that we through a proper enterprise architecture design, we can recommend that to the client. But it has to make sense. It doesn't have to be just like, because I like this purchasing system or the HR system, we're going to keep it. It has to make both economic sense and business sense to go forward with that.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. And then what about during an implementation then? What are some of the best ways that project teams, if they've already selected software, let's assume the organization in question here has not done an EA review yet. They've selected software, they're getting ready to implement, or maybe they're in the early stages of implementation. What are some of the best ways to address enterprise architecture, or to start addressing enterprise architecture during an implementation?
That's if you've selected the software already without doing a proper either enterprise architecture or some kind of an evaluation of your business processes and evaluation or comparison of the different applications to fit that business process, you're going to have some issues later on. Like, of course, you're going to have implementation is not going to go as smooth as possible. So for us, we had a couple of clients where they were in that process of implementation, and they found out that there's certain piece of functionality that they missed out. They didn't even include in their process, or the software does not cover those functionality, and they were just basically sold the software that does not cover those business requirements. So there is never I would say that it's not ever too late to do the enterprise architecture. You can halt the project, the implementation project, do an EA, and then if you are in a situation where you are in an impasse with the vendor in terms of functionality and the coverage of your business processes, then you have to do your the EA, and maybe there is a way to save the project, maybe by adding some bolt-ons or getting some software add-ons to cover the missing functionality, or maybe get rid of the vendor and find another vendor that can cover the process. But often these kinds of projects, if they start in the wrong from a wrong place, they usually then don't end up in the right place, or they don't end well.
Yeah. It's sort of like started as soon as possible, but better late than never at the same time. I mean, it's better than
exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes the more money you put into those projects that have trouble starts, it's not helping. So you're going to lose you're going to lose your time and your money, and the sooner you do a reset, the better it is. But I'm not saying that every single project that you start without an EA is going to fail. Of course, there is a bigger risk when you don't do the proper research up front.
Right.
It's all about managing risks, right?
Yeah. You mentioned change management earlier, and it just sort of something you said just jogged this in my head, though. So when you have dealt with IT groups within organizations that are defining this enterprise architecture and sort of the roadmap for decommissioning old systems and implementing new systems, have you do you see a sort of a resistance from the IT group, the internal IT group that's more sort of entrenched in the current state and they don't necessarily want to open their minds, or they feel threatened by opening their minds to what that future state architecture looks like? Or how does resistance to change factor into this, if it does at all, within the internal IT groups as it relates to this?
Yeah. So the resistance to change, I think, is more from in my experience, is more from the business side of
Mm,
things, and IT is, from our experience for the client that we work with. Yes, there is sometimes there are the people that want to, no matter what, to keep the old systems because that's what they like and they understand, and they're very good at handling. But more often we see the IT as a good um, advocate for the change of the systems, not necessarily the business processes, because they're not going to get involved in the business processes. What we see as a resistance more often is on the business side of things, where the people are resisting to the, the the change in the way they do things, and
mm,
that's coming from the new system. And um, you know the only way to address that and to reduce that resistance is to get them involved in the decision. To us, getting those IT people, sorry, the business people and the IT people involved in the decision making process from the start, from the enterprise architecture to the evaluation and selection, and later on into the entire implementation process, it's the key to get that project to a successful completion. Um, the Getting the data from the old system is something that, as you mentioned, is something that the IT is usually very capable of doing. And most often we see that IT is trying to get rid of the old systems because they are very hard to maintain, or they like to have better systems in place so they can have less trouble maintaining them.
right. Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's an interesting point. Yeah, I guess depending on the client, you might see resistance from the business, and that I agree is probably more common than resistance from IT. Um, I just think of the occasional client we work with where you've got the person that was involved with developing the legacy homegrown
oh yeah,
system 20 years
those
ago.
guys. Yeah.
If you ask that person for input on what that future state enterprise architecture looks like, sometimes you'll get sort of a biased view that comes at it from the perspective of how do I protect not my turf, but how do you protect what I've built, within the
Yeah,
company?
they are these people. We see a lot of them, at least one or two in any company that we go for, and depending on the strategy of the IT and the business platform development kind of strategy, those people are, they hold the key to that system, right? So, of course, if you rip that system apart, they have nowhere to go. Like they probably have, protecting their interests is key. But again, that's from a business point of view, that doesn't make sense to get the company. The company is held hostage to one person. What we see often, though, is the other way around. That also a problem, which is the digital transformation project is given to IT as the project and say, okay, go figure out which system we're going to have. And they go do their research, sometimes very good research, and they go back to the business. Okay, this is the system. That's where you have to go. and you have to implement, and we're starting implementation, let's say in a month. So the business is caught by surprise, and they have no say, or they feel that they had no say in that selection. And that's where the source of all that change management issues are coming from, and the resistance is coming from. If the IT was in line with the business and got the business involved in that decision making process, I think they would have not come up with that kind of a resistance in the future. And that's where our goal is often in our projects, to make sure that the IT is involved and the business is involved, and each they know their role in the evaluation and selection and the process that follows.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I've got a question that I know you answered, I think in passing or related to another question in earlier in the conversation, but I think it's worth coming back to as sort of a capstone summary of this entire discussion. But how do you suggest that a digital transformation project team gets started on the EA work stream? I think you've talked about it from a couple of angles here. There's sort of the ideally, here's how you do it. And then if you haven't done that, then what's the other option? Maybe.
Yeah, for sure. The first thing is to for us is to come up with the right team on the client side that knows the business. So you need to start with your champions, business champions, and of course get the IT also involved in terms of, because they're going to play a major role in identifying the systems. But we also have to identify the business processes. So there are you have to put a good team together, which again consists of the key stakeholders in terms of the business processes and people that understand the business rules, the business how the business works and operates, and also the IT support. So once you have that team, you start doing what we call it the business requirements gathering sessions. It doesn't have to be an extensive BPM or business process modeling exercise, because as you mentioned before, we are going to rip apart all those processes, replace them. So there is no need to get into those detailed business process modeling, but you need to have a very good overview of the business processes, and of course, the bottlenecks, the shortcomings of the current systems, and where you see improvements are going to help your business. So for example, as you mentioned, if there is a requirements for new technologies or things that are considered as best practices for your industry, you have to be able to identify those. So that is part of our business requirements gathering process. And once you have a map of your business processes, then you have to draw the systems on top of it, current systems, which IT will help you that, okay, I'll do this process with the help of this IT or the software. And there you find areas where there are processes and there are no systems, or they're already identified as this process is handled through Excel sheets or things like that. So you identify and document all of those processes, and that's where you start with. And that's where you can then translate those business processes into functions and features, or functions requirement sets that we call them. And then from there, you can identify vendors that can satisfy those requirements.
Right. Yeah. In other words, it gives you sort of a blueprint for selecting and implementing the right technology.
Exactly.
In addition to, business processes, business requirements, all this stuff that I think we sort of intuitively know you need to do.
Mhm.
Everyone's used to hearing about the term business requirements. And so I think that comes a little bit more naturally to organizations than thinking about that future state technical blueprint or the enterprise architecture blueprint as well.
Another thing that we do, and we often encourage people within the organizations to pay attention to, is that during those interview sessions, we bring in best practices, and we try to educate the business stakeholders with the best practices of their industry. So that's another way that we can insert some of that change management mentality or the notion of the change that is coming in their mind. So that way, when they see the new system during the demos later on in the stage, they can connect. Oh, that's what you meant. That's where that process is going to be changing too, and that's what I like, or that's what I don't like.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it helps you envision what that future
Yeah,
state's going to look like.
yeah,
Well, good. Well, I appreciate you taking the time here, Mehdi. This was a great conversation, and you and I were talking before the podcast recording that this is the first time that we've covered this topic on this podcast. So, really appreciate you being part of that and helping us unpack it in more detail. I think it's one of those things, a lot like change management or other aspects of digital transformations that organizations tend to overlook or downplay. They
exactly.
think, okay, that's that enterprise architecture stuff. We'll figure that out once we pick the software, once we start implementing it. And I think that's one of the takeaways here is that's not the right approach to addressing this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I'm glad that we could have this, and I hope that it was informative, and looking forward to see everybody at the Stratosphere.
Likewise, I'm looking forward to seeing you there, Mehdi. I'm looking forward to seeing the audience here. October 4th through the 6th in Denver. You can go to stratosphere2023.com to see the agenda. You can learn about the live entertainment we'll have. Just as a little sneak peek or a heads up, we are going to have a 80s tribute band there on Thursday evening, which I'm excited about. I'd say I'm excited about your topic, Mehdi, but I'd say a close second is going to be that 80s band. Seeing the 80s band, that's a
Yeah,
close
thank you.
second.
I'm very excited about the 80s band too. That's where my university years were. So
Yeah, I think a
cool.
lot of us, at our age, grew up in that era and are very familiar with it. So we'll have live entertainment. There'll be pure networking opportunities, a great way to meet other people in the ERP and digital transformation community, and of course, an opportunity to network with and learn from people like Mehdi, myself, and other speakers that will be there. So be sure to go to stratosphere2023.com, use the promo code STRAT20, STRAT20, and you'll get 20% off whichever ticket tier or pass tier that you choose. So hope to see you there. And thank you again for being here today, Mehdi. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. Hope to see you at Digital Stratosphere. And if not, or in the meantime, we'll see you hopefully next week on the Transformation Ground Control podcast. Hope everyone has a great week, and we will see you all soon. Take care, everyone. Thanks again, Mehdi.
Thank you very much.